One woman, forced into a situation she couldn't control, would bear a child that would change the course of history. Hagar, an Egyptian servant, was caught in a storm of decisions not her own, and Ishmael, her son, would forever carry the weight of God's promises. But what really happened to Hagar and Ishmael? The story you've never heard begins here. Hagar was a servant in the household of Abram and Sarai, two figures promised by God to become the parents of nations. But Sarai, despite being the wife of Abram, had not borne him any children. The years passed, and with each passing day, Sarai's desperation grew. She watched as time slowly slipped away, and with it, her hopes for the child she so longed for seemed to vanish. In the midst of this, Hagar entered the picture, a foreigner, an Egyptian, a woman with little control over her life or future. In those days, Abram and Sarai's faith was tested by the long silence of God's promises. Sarai, growing impatient and perhaps weary from waiting, decided to take matters into her own hands. She offered her servant, Hagar, to Abram, hoping that this would be the solution to their long-standing infertility. Sarai told Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my servant, perhaps I can build a family through her." Genesis 16 verse 2. And so, in a moment of human failure and impatience, Hagar found herself in a position no woman should ever have to be in, used as a means to fulfill the desires of others, with no say in the matter. Hagar's situation wasn't easy. She was a servant, and servants don't get to make choices. So when Sarai told her that she was to sleep with Abram and have a child, Hagar didn't have a say. She didn't want to do it, but it wasn't really her decision. She was a servant, her role was to obey. But this wasn't just some small task. Hagar had to carry a child for Sarai, her mistress, who couldn't have children herself. That's a lot to process. For Hagar, it was more than just being a servant, it was being a woman whose body was used as a way to fix someone else's problem. As Hagar became pregnant, the emotions started to pile up. She wasn't just carrying Abram's child, she was carrying the very thing Sarai had wanted for so long but couldn't have. And it wasn't just a simple pregnancy. The relationship between Hagar and Sarai began to fall apart. Sarai became bitter, resentful, and the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. Sarai's jealousy was clear. Hagar, who had never been treated as anything but a servant, now found herself with something Sarai could never have, a child that was, in a sense, Abram's heir. The more Hagar's belly grew, the more power she felt. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time, she wasn't the one with nothing to offer. She had what Sarai wanted most. It was hard to ignore. Hagar started to look at Sarai differently. The resentment grew. Sarai's harsh treatment of her, her jealousy, her bitterness, only made things worse. As time passed, the tension between Sarai and Hagar only grew worse. Sarai's jealousy became more obvious. She couldn't stand that Hagar, a servant, was carrying the child she had so desperately wanted for years. The situation was unbearable. Sarai began to mistreat Hagar, showing her anger and frustration through harsh words and actions. Hagar, who had already been in a powerless position, now found herself pushed even further down. Hagar, feeling completely powerless and mistreated, decided she couldn't take it anymore. In desperation, she fled into the wilderness. She left the safety of Abram and Sarai's household, heading into the unknown, with no clear destination in mind. The pain of the situation, the harsh treatment, and the feeling of abandonment had driven her to run. But as Hagar wandered through the wilderness, something unexpected happened. God intervened. While she was resting by a spring of water, an angel of God appeared to her. The angel didn't condemn her for running. Instead, the angel spoke words of comfort and direction. He told Hagar, "Return to your mistress and submit to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." Genesis 16 verses 9 to 10. The promise was clear, despite the pain, despite the mistreatment, God had a plan for Hagar's future, and it wasn't over yet. The angel then gave Hagar a message that would change her perspective entirely. He told her that her son's name would be Ishmael, which means, God hears, because God had heard her cries of affliction, Genesis 16 verse 11. In that moment, Hagar realized that even though she was a servant, even though she was running in fear, God had been listening to her. He had seen her suffering. This gave her a sense of dignity she had never known before. God wasn't ignoring her, He knew her pain, and He had a purpose for her son. With the angel's message, Hagar's heart was somewhat calmed. She returned to Sarai, not because she had to, but because she now understood that God saw her, and His promises would give her hope for the future. After her return, it wasn't long before Hagar gave birth to a son, whom she named Ishmael, just as the angel had instructed. For Hagar, the moment was one of relief. Her time in the wilderness, the doubts, and the fears were now behind her. She had fulfilled what was expected of her, she had given Abram the child Sarai could not. But the birth of Ishmael didn't bring peace. Instead, it only deepened the tension between Hagar and Sarai. Though Ishmael's birth was the fulfillment of part of God's promise to Abram, it did nothing to heal the emotional rift between the two women. Sarai, who had longed for a child of her own, now had to live with the reality that the child was not hers. Even though Ishmael was a gift to Abram, it was impossible for Sarai to escape the feeling of being replaced, of being left out. The power dynamics within the household were still unresolved. Hagar was still a servant, but now she was the mother of the child that Abram would care for. Sarai, in her jealousy and hurt, could not fully accept that. The household became even more tense. Sarai's resentment only grew, and even though she tried to hide it, it was clear that things between her and Hagar would never be the same. As the years passed, God kept His promise to Sarai. At the age of 90, Sarai gave birth to a son, Isaac. This was the child she had waited for, the child that God had promised Abram. Isaac's arrival, however, marked the beginning of a new set of challenges within the household. With Isaac's birth, the tension between him and Ishmael quickly became apparent. Sarah, who had struggled with jealousy and resentment for years, began to fear that Ishmael might take away Isaac's inheritance. In her eyes, Ishmael, the son of Hagar, the servant woman, should not share in the promise made to Abram. Isaac was the child of promise, the child through whom God would fulfill His covenant. But Sarah was afraid that Ishmael's presence would somehow undermine that promise. Genesis 21 verses 9 to 10 says, "But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abram was mocking. And she said to Abram, Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Sarah's jealousy and fear led her to demand that Abram send Hagar and Ishmael away. Abram, though reluctant, knew that he had to do what God commanded. God spoke to him in Genesis 21 verse 12, saying, "Do not be distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." God's message to Abram was clear: Isaac was the child of the promise, but he had also made promises to Hagar and Ishmael. Abram, after hearing God's voice, reluctantly agreed to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Despite the pain of the decision, God reassured Abram that Ishmael would not be abandoned. He told him, "I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring," Genesis 21 verse 13. So, with a heavy heart, Abram sent Hagar and Ishmael away. With only some bread and water, they were cast into the wilderness. It was a heartbreaking moment. Ishmael, once the hope of the household, now faced a future of uncertainty. But God had not forgotten them. He promised to protect Ishmael and make him into a great nation. After being sent away, Hagar and Ishmael were left to face the harsh wilderness alone. They wandered through the desert with no place to go, no one to help, and no resources to survive. The bread and water that Abram had given them quickly ran out, and with it, their hope. The desert was unforgiving, and soon, Hagar found herself in a place of despair. As the heat of the desert intensified, Hagar realized they wouldn't survive much longer. She placed Ishmael under a bush, unable to watch him suffer any longer. He was weak, dehydrated, and close to death. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Overcome with grief, Hagar sat at a distance, unable to watch her son die. She cried out to God, in anguish, knowing that she had no strength left to help him. But God was not absent in their suffering. In the midst of Hagar's desperation, an angel of God appeared to her, reassuring her not to be afraid. The angel told her, "Do not be afraid, God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 21 verse 17. God had not forgotten them, and his promise to Ishmael was still intact. The angel's words were a lifeline to Hagar, a reminder that God had seen their suffering and that he had a plan for Ishmael. The promise of a great nation for Ishmael, the son of a servant, was still valid. Hagar's grief began to turn into a renewed sense of hope. Then, God opened Hagar's eyes to a well of water nearby. This well, seemingly hidden from view, became a symbol of God's mercy and provision. It was a moment of revelation. In the midst of their greatest need, God provided, offering them not just physical water, but spiritual hope and new life. Hagar and Ishmael were no longer abandoned, God had given them what they needed to survive. With the water, they were able to drink and regain their strength. Hagar knew that God had shown her mercy, and as they survived and continued their journey, God's presence was with them. Ishmael grew up in the wilderness, and God remained faithful to his promise, watching over him as he became the father of a great nation. God had not abandoned them in the wilderness, he had guided them through it, offering hope, salvation, and the assurance that his promises would always stand. Ishmael grew up in the wilderness, where he became a skilled archer, learning to survive in the harsh environment that had once nearly claimed his life. The wilderness of Paran became his home, a place where he would find his strength and his place in the world. He was far from the comforts of the household he was once part of, but he thrived in his new life. God's promise to Hagar and Abram had been fulfilled, and Ishmael, the child born out of such complicated circumstances, became a man marked by survival, skill, and divine blessing. As Ishmael grew older, he married an Egyptian woman, and together they started a family. His descendants would go on to become a significant group of people, forming a nation of their own, as God had promised. Though Ishmael was not the child of the primary covenant between God and Abram, he was nonetheless part of God's plan. His legacy, though separate from Isaac's, would be one of strength and survival, and the nations that came from him would be many. Ishmael's story, from his birth in the midst of conflict to his survival in the wilderness, was a testament to God's faithfulness. Despite being cast aside by those he was connected to, God never abandoned him. Ishmael's legacy, carried through his children and their descendants, serves as a reminder that God hears the cries of those who are overlooked, abandoned, and forgotten by the world. God had a plan for Ishmael, just as he had for Isaac, and his promises remain true for both. The Bible does not specifically mention whether Hagar remarried after her time with Abram and the birth of Ishmael. However, we do know that she continued her life in the wilderness, where Ishmael grew up and eventually married an Egyptian woman, Genesis 21 verse 21. Hagar's story mainly focuses on her role as the mother of Ishmael and the struggles she faced with Sarai and Abram. In the absence of further details in Scripture, it's unclear whether Hagar remarried. The narrative shifts more toward Ishmael's future, leaving her personal life afterward unaddressed. However, what is certain is that God continued to care for Hagar and Ishmael, providing for them in the wilderness, ensuring their survival, and keeping his promise to make Ishmael into a great nation. As for Hagar's personal life, we can only speculate, but her story remains significant as a testament to God's care for the marginalized, the forgotten, and those caught in difficult circumstances. This story isn't just about struggle, it's about redemption, hope, and the unwavering truth that God sees and cares for us, no matter where we find ourselves. Hagar and Ishmael's legacy reminds us that God's plans are greater than our circumstances and that He will always provide, even in the most unexpected ways. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on this powerful tale of faith and survival. Let's keep the conversation going, and I'll see you in the next video.